They thought I was bluffing when I told them they were building on the wrong land. But when the lake came rushing back over their luxury driveways, into their marble-tiled living rooms, and swallowed up their backyards, their stunned faces were all I needed to see. This wasn't just a story of revenge, it was justice served cold and wet. My name is Jake, and for more than 2 decades, I owned a peaceful stretch of paradise, around 120 acres of land, which included a large natural lake tucked away in a quiet part of the state. This land wasn't just property, it was my family's legacy. My grandfather bought it back in the 60s. He was a rugged, old-school man who believed in hard work and the power of nature. He built a small dam at the edge of the lake to manage flooding and create more usable land around the water. Over time, as the dam reduced the lake's surface area slightly, we ended up with some solid, dry land around the perimeter, perfect for walking, fishing, or setting up a picnic. But make no mistake, the lake bed still legally belonged to us, even if the water had receded a little. After my grandfather passed away, the land came to me. I lived out of state for several years but kept paying the taxes, maintaining the dam, and visiting whenever I had time off work. I had plans to eventually build a cabin or maybe retire there someday. It was always in the back of my mind, my peaceful place away from everything. Then, about 2 years ago, I started getting strange calls. A friend of mine who lived nearby said construction crews had shown up near the lake. At first, I assumed it was just the county doing some minor work, maybe clearing trails or improving roads. But as the months passed, things escalated. Bulldozers moved in. Foundations were poured. Street signs went up. Willow Creek Estates, they called it. Sounded fancy. I drove out there the next chance I got, and what I saw nearly gave me a heart attack. There were not 1 or 2, but dozens of homes being built. Nice ones, 2 big 2-story houses with wraparound porches, stone fireplaces, and newly paved driveways. Street lamps, manicured lawns, even a fancy gated entrance. My lakefront paradise was now some cookie-cutter neighborhood. At first, I truly believed there had been a mistake. Maybe the county had sold the wrong land. Maybe there was some misunderstanding in the zoning department. So I went to the county office with all my paperwork, title deeds, tax records, historical maps, everything proving this land had been in my family for decades. The clerk at the desk looked confused, then concerned. She called over a supervisor. They dug through files and eventually found the plan submitted by the HOA developer. That's when my jaw hit the floor. The developer had submitted fake paperwork. Documents falsely claiming the land had been abandoned and unclaimed for years. They even doctored survey maps to make it look like the lake never existed, calling the area dry, unused earth, ready for residential development. None of this was true. Not even close. But the scariest part? The county had signed off on it. They'd approved permits, zoning changes, and new utilities, all based on forged documents. By the time I was sitting in that office, 35 houses were already built, with people living in them, kids riding bikes down what used to be my lake bed. My blood boiled. I marched right into the new neighborhood and demanded to speak with whoever was in charge. That's when I met Todd, the smug, well-dressed president of the HOA. He wore a golf shirt and sunglasses and gave me the fakest smile I've ever seen. I told him who I was, explained that this land was legally mine, and asked how they could possibly build an entire subdivision on private property without the owner's knowledge or permission. Todd didn't even flinch. He said, "Sir, we followed every legal step, and we've had no complaints until now. If you continue to harass our residents, we'll involve the police." Harass? I was the landowner. I tried to explain again, more calmly, but he cut me off. "I suggest you take this up with the county. As far as we're concerned, you're trespassing." He turned and walked away, leaving me standing in the middle of what used to be my grandfather's favorite fishing spot, now covered in fresh turf and a kid's swing set. That night I barely slept. I sat up going through every document, every satellite image, every recorded deed I could find. It was clear-cut. I owned the land. They were the ones trespassing. I tried calling a lawyer the next day, and while he agreed I had a strong case, he warned me that it would take years to resolve in court, and that I'd be up against not just the HOA, but the real estate developers, the county, and probably a few angry homeowners who'd unknowingly bought stolen land. It was a legal nightmare. But that's when I remembered something important, something powerful. The dam. The very dam my grandfather had built decades ago. It was still operational. And legally, the lake was mine to manage. If I couldn't get justice fast enough in court, maybe it was time to let nature take back what was hers. I didn't make the decision lightly. I spent days researching water law, environmental regulations, and even consulted a hydrologist to make sure I wasn't doing anything that would put lives at risk. The houses were all built on what used to be shallow lake edge, no danger of anyone drowning. But I knew that if the dam gates were opened, the water would rise. Slowly, steadily. And that would change everything. Early the next morning, I stood by the old dam, staring out at what was once a vibrant, shimmering lake. My grandfather had built this dam with his own hands to control the seasonal water rise, and now here I was, staring at it as the key to restoring not just the water, but the truth. I didn't act right away. Even though I was angry, I wasn't reckless. I needed to be certain I was legally in the right. So I went back to the county office, not to argue, but to leave a paper trail. I submitted a formal notice of property encroachment, attached all my legal deeds, and included a statement of intent to restore the lake's water level to its natural state as per original environmental conditions. I even hand-delivered copies to the HOA's mailing address. Todd, unsurprisingly, didn't respond. That silence told me everything I needed to know. They thought I wouldn't go through with it. They thought I was just a lonely landowner too broke or too scared to fight. But I wasn't scared. I was determined. I waited for the right moment, one with no rain in the forecast and no one nearby. Then I returned to the dam at dawn, opened the maintenance shed, dusted off the lever system, and slowly began turning the valve that controlled the floodgate. It creaked like an old man's back, but it worked. A low hiss of air escaped as water began to seep out, then trickle, then pour. It wasn't dramatic at first. The process of refilling the lake would take time. But nature, once set in motion, doesn't stop easily. By midday, the shallow channels and low-lying areas began to fill. Small pools reconnected like veins refilling with blood. Frogs returned. Birds circled overhead. The lake was waking up again. By the second day, the water had crept several inches higher, licking the edge of manicured lawns and threatening the fancy garden beds surrounding those houses. I knew it wouldn't take long for someone to notice, and sure enough, a woman in yoga pants with a stroller flagged me down near the edge of the property. "Excuse me, sir, are you with the HOA? Our backyard's flooding," she said, annoyed. I smiled calmly and replied, "No, ma'am, I'm the landowner, and the lake's returning to its natural boundaries." She blinked, clearly confused, then walked away mumbling. That night, I set up a few cameras and recorded everything, how the water rose, how it followed the natural contours of the land, how every inch it climbed was within the original lake bed documented on the surveys I owned. I wanted proof that I wasn't just flooding property out of spite, I was restoring nature to its rightful place. Word spread fast. On day 3, a construction truck arrived at the neighborhood's front gate. Then another. I overheard 2 workers arguing over whether to install emergency drainage systems. But it was already too late. The water level was rising faster now, spreading wider, and beginning to pool against the foundations of the lowest houses. Todd finally reached out. He called me directly, his voice furious and shaky. "What the hell do you think you're doing? You're destroying property. I calmly replied, you built illegally on a lakebed. You were warned. I filed legal notice. Now the lake's just coming home. He threatened lawsuits, arrests, injunctions. I told him I'd be happy to meet in court, with my title deeds, environmental assessments, and the history of dam management approved by the state decades ago. He hung up. The next day, the HOA called a community meeting. I wasn't invited, of course, but I parked my truck nearby and listened from a distance. The residents were furious. Some demanded refunds from the HOA. Others wanted to sue the developers. A few were even yelling at Todd, blaming him for failing to do due diligence. One guy in a golf shirt shouted, "This guy owns the land? You told us it was safe." Todd tried to calm them, but the panic was spreading faster than the water. And the worst was yet to come. On day 5, a heavy rainstorm blew in. Not enough to flood anything on its own, but enough to push the already rising lake into a tipping point. The shallow backyards turned into knee-deep marsh. Basements began to flood. Electrical panels shorted out. The houses at the lowest elevation, about 7 of them, became inaccessible. Emergency services were called. The county dispatched engineers. News vans showed up. It became a full-blown media event. And when the news reporters asked who was responsible for the flooding, I stood calmly in front of the camera, held up my grandfather's original land deed, and said, "This is my land. This is my lake. I have every right to restore it to its natural state. The people who built here did so illegally. I warned them. I filed everything legally. The water is just doing what it was always meant to do." The video went viral. That clip spread across social media like wildfire. Thousands of comments poured in, some calling me a hero, others calling me a madman. But the one thing no one could deny was that I had the law on my side. Environmentalists even chimed in, praising the restoration of the wetland ecosystem. A few homeowners tried to fight back. One man even tried to pump the water away from his backyard using a rental pump. But the lake wasn't going anywhere. And neither was I. I hired a local attorney, filed a cease and desist against the HOA for harassment, and moved into a small camper on higher ground to monitor everything up close. From there, I watched the water reclaim every inch of what was once stolen. Trees that had withered began to bloom. Fish returned to the shallows. It was as if the land had been holding its breath for years and could finally exhale. The HOA? They went radio silent. Todd stopped responding. Residents began quietly moving out. Some tried to sell, but word had spread too far. No one wanted to buy a home built on a legal disaster. What started as stolen land ended in soaked carpets and shattered illusions. And I didn't lift a finger in anger, just a lever. By the 6th day, the once pristine neighborhood that the HOA had proudly called Willow Creek Estates looked more like a lakeside ghost town. Water lapped at the steps of houses that had been occupied only weeks ago. Fancy patio furniture was half submerged, children's toys floated aimlessly through what used to be cul-de-sacs, and the walking trails had turned to mud. The irony was thick, you could almost taste it. These were million-dollar homes built on what they believed was prime real estate, but they were really just shells standing on stolen ground. I stood at the edge of my grandfather's dam every morning, watching the water reclaim what was always meant to be a lake. The strange part? I didn't feel vindictive. I felt peaceful. For years I had kept this land sacred, honoring my grandfather's legacy, but the world had changed. Greedy developers and their fake paperwork thought they could bulldoze history for profit. They thought they could erase a family's connection to the land and bury it under asphalt and mortgages. But they didn't count on one thing, me. I was patient. I was meticulous. And unlike them, I didn't need to break the law to win. My lawyer kept me updated almost daily. By now, lawsuits were being flung in every direction. Homeowners were suing the HOA for failing to disclose that the land was under dispute. The HOA was trying to sue the developers for misrepresentation. And the developers, from what I heard, were nowhere to be found, probably off enjoying their profits in another state, far away from the flood zone they left behind. One morning, a couple came up to me while I was inspecting the dam controls. They looked distraught, mud on their shoes, child in tow, holding a soaking stuffed animal. "You're the guy who owns the land, right?" the man asked. I nodded, cautiously. "We didn't know," he said. "No one told us any of this. We bought the house 6 months ago. It's our first home. All our savings, it's gone." There was no anger in his voice. Just sadness. I paused. I could have been bitter. I could have yelled or told him it wasn't my problem. But I didn't. "I'm sorry this happened to you," I said honestly. "But you've been lied to just like I was. I tried to stop it before anyone moved in." The man sighed and nodded. They left quietly, wading back through ankle-deep water toward their sinking dream. It was hard to watch, but it wasn't my fault. I reminded myself of that every time guilt crept in. I had followed the law, done everything by the book. I gave them warning after warning. The HOA ignored me. The developers ran away. And now, nature was simply doing what nature does best, reclaiming. The media coverage kept growing. Local news became regional, and then national outlets picked it up. The headlines were something else. Man restores lake, floods illegal HOA development. The flood of justice, how one man took back his land. David versus Goliath, lake owner sinks 35 mansions, literally. I even got offers to appear on talk shows and give interviews, but I turned most of them down. I wasn't doing this for fame or followers. I wanted to make sure this never happened again, not to me, not to anyone. The environmental impact was also being noticed. Experts began praising the lake restoration as a positive step toward repairing the local ecosystem. Apparently, the area had once been a nesting ground for migratory birds and amphibians that had disappeared over the years. Now, those species were slowly returning. What HOA called flooding, nature called healing. But not everyone was happy, of course. The remaining residents were still clinging to hope, though that hope was sinking, literally. A few tried to form a resistance of sorts. They called it a Save Willow Creek committee and began handing out flyers to anyone who would listen. They painted me as a villain, a heartless recluse who had flooded innocent families. One woman even accused me publicly of environmental terrorism. But their noise didn't last long. As the days passed, more homes were evacuated. Insurance companies refused to cover the damages once they learned the houses were built without proper land rights. The banks stopped backing the mortgages. And just like that, the foundation of their false community began to crumble. Todd? He vanished. One day he was holding HOA meetings and sending out angry newsletters. The next, his house was empty. A "for sale" sign floated in his front yard, half underwater. I heard he fled the state entirely. Probably to avoid lawsuits. The community that once looked down on me, that laughed at my warnings, now stood knee-deep in water, abandoned by the very people who sold them a dream built on a lie. Meanwhile, the lake was more alive than ever. Fish returned in droves. The water sparkled in the sun. And every evening, I sat by the restored shoreline, watching the ripples carry away the last traces of cement and greed. It was poetic. I began building a small dock again, just like the one my grandfather had. I didn't need anything fancy. Just a place to sit, fish, and think. As I laid the boards down, I thought about the long fight it took to get here. The ignorance. The threats. The legal hoops. But in the end, I didn't need to raise my voice. I didn't need a bulldozer or a wrecking crew. All I needed was the truth, patience, and a floodgate. Sometimes, justice doesn't come with sirens or court orders. Sometimes, it comes quietly, like rising water.